Thanks for staying with us. Now, as we've been saying, every Black History season we hear about great figures like Nanny of the Maroons or Martin Luther King. But does hearing about these figures really bring their exploits to life? Well, one British historian thinks not, so he's written a book which helps us to meet them. It's targeted at the younger reader, but it might help adults too. So let's welcome Dr. Tony Talburt to the show. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Well,
I like this, the history on the page, Adventures in Black British History. And you've got a couple of young people looking at the huge book laid out in front of them. Let me just, there we go, there you can see it right now. Can you explain the motivation behind it? Is it, as I said, because you were concerned that the figures from history were not being brought to life, so you decided to do this? Is that what the motivation was?
yeah, well, for about 30 years or so, I've been teaching African and Caribbean studies, African and Caribbean history, both here and in Jamaica. And one of the things that I find when I meet with parents is that they often ask me, well, what can we use as a source for children? Mm-hmm. And there aren't very many black history books for children, especially with a British focus. So what I decided to do was not to write a textbook. I've written other books, but I decided that for this one, I'd concentrate on children, and I would I would actually teach history through stories. Mm-hmm. So what you have is actually 7 stories about 7 different individuals. All of them were black, and all of them lived or worked in Britain. Let's
go through one or two of them. Who have you chosen, and how have you helped the children to waken up to what they really meant?
Right. Well, what I've done is I decided that I'd do a very broad sweep of history, going back nearly 2,000 years. So the first character is, there's a story there about Septimius Severus. Yeah. Now, this is a Roman emperor, but he also happens to be an African Roman emperor. Mm. And he comes to Britain, 2nd century, to help England in its struggle with the Caledonians.
So going up to the north of the border.
Yeah,
Towards Hadrian's Wall.
Towards Hadrian's Wall, very much so, very much so.
Where was he from? He's from Carthage?
No, he was from Libya. Yeah, he was born in North Africa. So, but on the English, or the British, the UK national curriculum, there's a topic there, the Romans. And I thought what I would do is I would select topics from the national curriculum so that it can be used in schools. Yeah. Teachers can realize that, oh, we can teach about black people right within the curriculum. So I used him as an example. There's another interesting story about Andrew Watson. Mm-hmm. Now, he's very interesting because he's born in Guyana, and he comes to England, and he ends up playing football for Scotland in 1881. So he becomes the first black player to not just play for Scotland, he captains the Scottish national team.
And he was before Walter
He was before,
Tull.
oh yes, before Walter and Arthur Wharton. He's about 10, 12 years before them. He played for Scotland in 1881. He was playing football from the 1870s. He becomes the first black, what we might call Football Association secretary. Right. He becomes a secretary of his local club in Scotland. But he lived also in England, in London.
And you said,
So so what I'm trying to do here is just to get children, young people, and adults to realize that there were a number of black people doing all kinds of things in this country, and so I've decided not to write the standard textbook, but rather to just tell a story. So this book is meant to be the first in the series.
Well, I'm just looking at the characters. Yeah. 2 children you've
in this first series,
Omar and Zara.
That's right.
And so Omar and Zara go back in time, do they?
That's right. They keep, it's quite by accident, they act, in the first story, they repeat these words, oh, I wish we could go back in time and see what was going on there. I wish I could be part of the history on the page, hence the title. They repeat those words, and then by magic, it just takes them back.
So it's almost like stepping into a TARDIS.
They go straight,
like Doctor Who.
Yeah, it's that kind of scenario, yes. So they go back in time. So every story starts with a British problem. Omar was struggling to play football properly. He said, who can I watch? Who can I learn from? He goes back and he meets Arthur. No, he doesn't. He meets Andrew Watson.
Yes, that's Andrew Watson. And what do you have Andrew Watson saying to
he actually does a little training session with them, saying, no, you must mark your man, keep your hand, go goal side. So it's that kind of stuff. Because obviously this story didn't really take place.
No.
But what we're trying to do...
You're joking.
What we're trying to do is to get the young people to... And I do this in all the stories. Yeah. At the end of each one, I do a summary of basic facts about the individuals so that people, the readers, realize, okay, it's fictitious, but this is actual fact. There was a guy called Andrew Watson. Same thing with the one on, what I call him, the Jamaican Guy Fawkes.
Yes.
We know about Guy Fawkes, who tried to blow up Parliament, but there was a Jamaican who did exactly the same thing in 1820, right here in Edgware Road, well, I say here, but in London, Cato Street, Edgware Road, tried to, with a group of 4 or 5 other guys, Arthur Thistlewood, they actually tried to carry out a similar kind of conspiracy to get rid of the government and to lead it. So,
and they paid a very serious price.
Well,
I think,
they were, yes, they were. Let's say, yes, they did. They were executed. I was trying to say it nicely, but
there's no way.
There's no nice way of saying it.
It wasn't quite as bad as maybe the 17th century. What they do to you when you commit high treason. But you've written other books, obviously, haven't you, Tony? Food of the Plantation Slaves of Jamaica, Rum Rivalry and Resistance and Fighting for the Caribbean Spirit. And these are all kind of tackling particular aspects of the Caribbean and Caribbean British history.
Yeah, well, the one on the food of the, well, the one on rum is really a political history of Caribbean rum. Rum is is the only product in the Caribbean where they have an international competitive market or competitive edge. Rum is a Caribbean product. Sugar and bananas and some of these other crops, which we think are Caribbean in origin, they're not. Rum, the Caribbean is the world's leading producer of rum. So I wrote a political history of that.
And what conclusions do you arrive at in that?
Well, what I was trying to say in that book is that there is a major struggle taking place within the European Union to market rum. So I was looking at how rum is marketed and the struggles during the 1970s to the year 2000 to actually market rum within Europe. So that's what that book was about.
And I'm very interested too in Food of the Plantation Slaves of Jamaica.
Yeah,
because people often talk about why Jamaicans are built in a particular way and why they're so athletic. And of course, we know Usain Bolt talks about chicken nuggets and yam and banana and whatever. But you obviously you take a more serious approach to this, obviously.
Yeah, what I did in that book, a very small book, was just to look at what did the Jamaican slaves actually eat.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, again, many people might not be aware of is the fact that what we sometimes describe as Caribbean food is not Caribbean in origin. So there's no ackee and saltfish. These things are not original from the Caribbean. Mango, breadfruit, plantain, rice and peas, they're not Caribbean in origin. These are foods that were borrowed and used from other parts of the world. If you go to Ghana, they have rice and peas, which they've had since at least the 11th century. We've got documentary evidence showing that. Wachi is what the Ghanaians call it, but it's the same concept, rice with the beans or the rice and the peas. So there's a lot of food that we think is Caribbean is not. And I've done the same with British food. A lot of what we, tea, chips, all these foods, because potato is Peruvian in origin. So, but we call it, today we might think that, potato is very British, very Irish, but in origin it's not. So it all has, and this is why I think the black history is so important, because we need children and young people to be aware of the connections in history. And this book is just trying to make one small step in that direction.
And Chris, is this a kind of book that you would have loved to have read when you were, 7, 8, 9 years old?
Well,
sort of thing? Did you have much?
I think these things are incredibly important. I mean, I worked on a book with my father about Alexander Dumas, and the guy who wrote The Three Musketeers.
That's right.
It was a mixed race, and his father was actually a general for Napoleon, and he based the whole of The Three Musketeers around his father and his father's mates, who were all black guys in something called the Black Legion, most of them from Haiti. And those guys, that they were exactly like Aramis, Porthos, Athos. They did all the same sort of things. The main guy there was a guy called Chevalier de Saint-Georges, who was a great swashbuckler, but also the best violinist in France, a great composer. Wonderful. No one knows about these guys.
No.
Also had an affair with Marie Antoinette. He was quite a fella.
Tremendous stuff. Oh, yeah, indeed. You should have devoted the programme to him.
Yeah,
Tony, before we finish, tell us where people can buy your book, because I suspect there'll be an appetite for it, for people to buy it for their children.
Yeah, I mean, it's available worldwide. You can get it on Amazon, you can get it from any bookshop, Waterstones, any major bookshop. Just give them the title, and they won't have it in stock, because I went to Waterstones myself, and obviously they didn't have it.
Where is my book?
But they checked on their catalogue. It's there. and you can order it and it will be yours very easily. You can also go on, I don't know if you've got my website, but you can certainly get it from
Yeah.
Waterstones and those sources.
We'll put your details of the website, of course, on the screen.
Right,
Thank
okay.
you very much indeed. And that's it for Shoot the Messenger this week. Remember, you can watch today's edition again later this week on Vox Africa, or catch specially selected highlights on our website, voxafrica.co.uk/STM. You can also follow me on Twitter. I'm at Bonsuman. Many thanks to my guests, Tony Talbot, Ashra Kwesi, Erica Fremantle and Chris Cleverly. And you for watching. Till the same time next week. Thanks again for joining us, and goodbye.